What is the Church's stance on abortion in cases of ectopic pregnancy? So here we need to make sure that we are speaking very clearly, because errors in language will lead to errors in thought, and errors in thought will lead to errors in action. Now, when we're talking about abortion, ultimately what we're talking about is the killing of an innocent life. Now, I would define abortion as the direct and intentional killing of a preborn child. And I want to make sure that this is clear, that it is direct and intentional. Because if you don't have those two things, then technically speaking, it's not abortion. And so I want to make sure that's clear, because abortion is always and everywhere wrong. To use somewhat of an analogy, imagine a person who is a murderer. They have killed one person. That person killed an innocent directly and intentionally. Obviously, this would be morally repugnant. This would be morally wrong. But now imagine a general who is fighting a war, and he has a battalion of soldiers, and he recognizes that they need to hold this specific site. And so he sends his soldiers to go forward and defend this site with the expectation that many of them will probably die. Now, in this case, on an objective level, more people died because of the general's decision than did because of the murderer. However, the general did not intend, nor did he directly kill these soldiers. And so, technically speaking, the general could do this following the principle of double effect. I'm going to discuss more about this later. But I want to make sure we're clear on this. When we talk about abortion, we're talking about the direct and intentional killing of a preborn child. Now, when we come to cases of ectopic pregnancy, we are entering into a situation in which a child has implanted in an area outside of the uterus, so usually in a fallopian tube. Now, if a person decides to intentionally and directly kill that child with some sort of chemical, that would not be morally permitted, because what is happening here? You are intending the death of the child, and this is done directly. You are intentionally killing this child, and this is your object. This is what you are doing. So in a case like this would not be okay. However, there are circumstances in which the death of the fetus could be foreseen but unintended and not direct. Another example, this would be a case that's not necessarily ectopic, but if a woman had cancer, she could, in theory, receive chemotherapy to try to heal the cancer, or to destroy the cancer, with the foreseen but unintended consequence of the child dying in the womb. Now, again, this is very important. It cannot be direct and it cannot be intentional. If either of those two things is present, it would not be morally permitted. The tool that we would use to determine whether or not an ectopic pregnancy could be treated would be the principle of double effect. The principle of double effect comes from St. Thomas Aquinas' writings, and it's focused in on determining whether or not an action is moral if it has both a good and a bad effect, a bad outcome. This is why it's called the principle of double effect. So the principle of double effect has 4 criteria that must be met in order for an action to be morally permissible. The first step, the first criteria, is that the action cannot be intrinsically evil. It cannot be intrinsically wrong. An example of this would be the direct and intentional killing of a child, or the direct and intentional killing of a person. Regardless of the circumstances that follow after it, it is always and ever wrong to intentionally and directly kill someone. The second circumstance is that the good cannot come from the evil. Oftentimes, this is seen as a check to see whether or not the first criteria is being upheld. Because if the good comes from the evil, what you are in fact doing is doing the evil thing for the sake of receiving the good thing. So a silly example that's oftentimes thrown around, you're in a Nazi concentration camp, the Nazi gives you a gun and says, shoot this innocent child or we're going to kill 10 other people. You cannot intentionally kill this one innocent person for the sake of them not doing another action. So that would be immoral. The third criteria is you must will the good outcome and not the bad outcome. If you will the bad outcome, it is immoral. If you want the child to die, that is not moral. The fourth and final one is that there must be proportionality, that the good must merit the bad outcome. So, using the ectopic pregnancy as an example, there's a surgery called a salpingectomy. In the salpingectomy, what takes place is the child embedded in the fallopian tube is beginning to expand and to grow. The fallopian tube is likely going to rupture. And so what is done is that section of the fallopian tube is removed so that way it doesn't rupture and cause internal bleeding in the woman. Now, we have a good thing and a bad thing coming forth from here. The good is the life of the mother is being preserved by the removal of this of the fallopian tube that might rupture. The bad is the foreseen but unintended consequence of the death of the child. Now, the first step would be, is this something that is intrinsically wrong? Well, no, it is not intrinsically wrong because you do not want the death of the child. It is not intentional, the death of the child. Hopefully in the future, as science develops, we'll be able to have some sort of artificial womb in which, in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, the child could be transferred to that womb and allowed to grow. And so the evil is not, this action is not intrinsically morally evil. The second is that the good thing, the preservation of the life of the mother, is not brought about by the bad thing, the death of the child. The reason for this can again be seen in the idea of the artificial womb. If you can take the child, place it into another place where it can grow, and the mother still lives, you can see quite clearly that the good not come from the bad. The third one is you cannot intend the evil. And in the situation that I'm presenting, in the ectopic pregnancy, the mother does not want the death of the child. And so, yes, in fact, this is willing the good in the situation, so it passes that criteria. And the fourth and final one is the proportion. The life of the mother is, in fact, equal with the life of the child. It's a life for a life, and so there is at least proportion. Now, I will say that the principle of double effect only tells you what is morally permissible, not what is morally excellent. And so there are situations in which a mother can choose to give her life to save the child. A great example of this is one of the saints of the church whose name I'm drawing a blank on right now, who was suffering from cancer. She was pregnant with her fourth child, and she was told that she would have to begin chemotherapy immediately, or she would probably die. That mother chose to sacrifice her own life for the sake of the child. And so the child was delivered healthy, survived. However, this great saint unfortunately passed away because of the cancer. And so I use this as an example. The principle of double effect tells you what is morally permissible, but not necessarily what is morally heroic, what is morally excellent. And so in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, it is morally permissible so long as it is done with the intention of not killing the child directly. Killing of the child with something like methotrexate would be morally reprehensible and not be allowed.